The moment William Carter stepped into his penthouse that rainy afternoon, he froze. Not because of the silence he was used to, but because of the sound he hadn't heard in years. Pure, unrestrained laughter. It wasn't his own. It wasn't even from a guest. It was coming from his 3-year-old son, Benjamin, a fragile, pale boy who had never taken a single step in his life. William's eyes widened as he took in the scene. There, in the middle of the living room, Benjamin was balancing on top of someone's feet, his tiny body swaying with joy. Underneath him lay Grace, the new housemaid, a young black woman with no medical credentials, just gentle hands, and a quiet, reassuring presence. Grace lowered Benjamin carefully, steadying him not with her hands but with her faith in him. And then, the impossible happened. Benjamin stood. On his own. No support. No hesitation. William's chest tightened, his briefcase slipping from his grip as his son, for the very first time, took 3 wobbly steps straight into his arms. The boy laughed, a sound so bright it seemed to crack the walls William had built around his heart. For years, doctors had said Benjamin could walk, but wouldn't. Therapists had tried, and failed. Yet here was Grace, succeeding without a single clinical tool, only patience, presence, and a language spoken not in words but in trust. In that moment, William realized he wasn't just witnessing a medical breakthrough. He was witnessing a miracle. That afternoon, the elevator doors slid open, and William Carter stepped into the quiet, rain-soaked stillness of his penthouse. His shoes squelched against the marble floor, his navy suit clinging from the downpour. He expected the same heavy silence that had filled his home for years. A silence that wrapped itself around every room since his wife's passing. But instead, different sound reached his ears, high-pitched, breathless giggles, full of life. The sound pulled him down the hall, briefcase still in hand. And then, as he stepped into the granite living room, the world shifted. His son, Benjamin, a pale, delicate 3-year-old who had never taken a step in his life, was balancing on the feet of Grace, their new housemaid. She lay flat on her back, legs in the air, holding the boy as though he were an airplane. Benjamin's arms flailed with joy, his knees flexing, his body alive in ways William had never seen. Grace eased him down, letting his small feet touch the carpet. She didn't hold him, didn't guide him, just gave him space. And then, impossibly, Benjamin stayed standing. His wide eyes locked onto his father's, and in that suspended moment, William forgot to breathe. This wasn't a twitch or a stumble. His son was standing, steady and real. Benjamin? William's voice cracked. The boy turned toward him. And then it happened. The thing no doctor, no therapist, no costly treatment had ever achieved. Benjamin took a step. One. Then another. Then a third, arms outstretched, straight into his father's embrace. William's briefcase thudded to the floor as he dropped to his knees, catching the boy before he could topple. His arms trembled as he held Benjamin close, hearing his son's laughter fill the air, breaking through years of frustration, fear, and quiet grief. "I don't understand," William whispered, looking over Benjamin's head toward Grace. She didn't look triumphant, only calm. "You don't need to," she said softly. "Just hold him." For years, specialists had told him Benjamin's condition was psychological, that his body was capable, but his mind wasn't ready. William had paid for the best therapy, bought every tool, signed every check, hoping to buy progress. But Grace, without credentials, or expensive programs, had done in one afternoon what thousands of dollars couldn't. When William asked how, she shrugged. "I didn't try to fix him. I just listened. He taught me how to speak his language." Her words landed heavier than he expected. He remembered all the clinical evaluations, the sterile rooms, the endless sessions that treated Benjamin like a problem to solve. Grace treated him like a child who wanted to play. And somehow, play had turned into trust. William tightened his hold on Benjamin, realizing just how close he had come to giving up on moments like this. He had been so focused on solutions that he had forgotten the simplest truth: his son didn't need a cure. He needed connection. In the quiet that followed, William studied Grace. She wasn't just the new maid. She was the reason Benjamin was in his arms, the reason his little boy's first steps were into his father's embrace, not into the hands of a stranger in a therapy room. Benjamin shifted in his arms, looking up at his father with a grin that seemed to say, "See, I can." And for the first time in years, William felt something he hadn't dared hope for. Faith. Faith that his son's journey wasn't over. Faith that, perhaps, neither was his own as a father. Grace broke the silence. "He's still afraid," she said gently. "Not of walking, of being left alone." William swallowed, the truth hitting harder than he expected. He thought about all the nights he'd worked late, the mornings he'd left before Benjamin was awake, the weekends filled with meetings instead of moments. Maybe his son's stillness hadn't just been about his legs. It had been about his heart. "I'll stay home," William said. The words felt strange on his tongue, but right. Grace didn't smile. "He'll know if you mean it." William nodded, looking back down at Benjamin, who was now curled into his chest, eyes heavy with sleep. "I mean it." And this time, he did. The next morning, the house felt different. Light spilled through the wide windows, and the smell of pancakes drifted from the kitchen. But the real change was in the living room, where William sat on the rug, sleeves rolled up, tie gone, watching his son stack blocks. No talking, no directing, just being there. When Benjamin reached for a block and toppled over, William instinctively leaned forward. But before he could move, the boy pushed himself up and tried again, determination on his face. William blinked fast, astonished. It wasn't just the walking, it was the spirit. From the doorway, Grace watched quietly, towel in hand. "You look surprised," she said. "I am," William admitted. "I used to think he was broken." "He was never broken," she replied. "Just waiting for someone to stop rushing." William nodded slowly, a realization settling in. He had been rushing everything, Benjamin's progress, his own healing, even their moments together. But now, for the first time, he was learning to stay. Benjamin crawled into his lap, curling up as though he had been there 1,000 times before. No hesitation, no fear, just trust. William wrapped his arms around him, the weight of his son grounding him in a way nothing else could. He had almost missed this. But he hadn't. Not this time. William Carter had been told the same thing by every expert he had ever hired. His son, Benjamin, could walk, but wouldn't. The words always carried the same clinical detachment, the same list of exercises and therapy schedules, the same implication that progress was just a BS, a matter of finding the right method and paying the right price. Yet year after year, nothing changed. Benjamin's legs remained still, his small frame curled in the safety of his chair or bed, his silence deeper than any prescription could reach. That was before Grace arrived. She wasn't a specialist. She didn't come armed with certifications, degrees, or a carefully laminated plan. She came with a soft voice, a steady gaze, and a way of being in a room that didn't demand attention but invited it. From the first day, William noticed something unusual. She never pushed Benjamin. She never coaxed him to try harder or reminded him of what he couldn't do. Instead, she seemed to be learning him, not just observing, but listening in a way he had never seen before. When William finally asked her how she had done it, how she had managed to get Benjamin, not just standing, but walking, Grace's answer was so simple it almost frustrated him. "I didn't try to fix him," she said, her tone calm but unwavering. "I just listened. He taught me how to speak his language." William blinked. "His language?" Grace nodded. "Every child has one. Sometimes it's words, sometimes it's movement, sometimes it's the spaces between. Benjamin's is quiet. You can't hear it if you rush." It was such a stark contrast to the environment Benjamin had endured for years. Bright rooms, busy voices, ticking stopwatches, strangers leaning over him with charts in hand. The world had been trying to correct him, measure him, prove him. Grace, on the other hand, simply sat on the floor beside him, or hummed while folding laundry in the same room, or rolled a ball toward him without asking him to roll it back. She didn't place demands on him. She gave him space. And in that space, something shifted. Benjamin began watching her with quiet curiosity. When she laughed, he laughed back, not because he was prompted, but because he wanted to. When she tapped her feet to a rhythm only she seemed to hear, he inched closer. When she laid flat on her back and lifted her legs into the air, he climbed onto her feet without hesitation, letting himself be flown like an airplane. That was the moment William had walked in to witness. The moment Benjamin was standing on his own, trusting the world enough to try. Grace explained that children who have experienced frustration or fear often withdraw, not because they are incapable, but because they no longer believe the world will meet them where they are. When you stop trying to make them meet you on your terms, she said, they start to move toward you. William thought about all the times he had tried to motivate Benjamin with expensive toys, high-tech therapy devices, even trips to specialists in other cities. He realized now that each of those attempts had been on his terms, designed to achieve progress he could measure. Grace had abandoned the concept of measurement entirely. She didn't care if Benjamin walked 2 steps or 20. She cared if he felt safe enough to try again tomorrow. In the weeks that followed, William began to see the method in her simplicity. She noticed when Benjamin flinched at sudden noises and adjusted her own movements to be softer. She picked up on his fascination with stacking objects and used that to create games that required reaching, bending, and shifting balance. She paid attention to the way he tilted his head when curious, the way his fingers fidgeted when nervous. Most of all, she didn't fill the air with instructions. She allowed silence to be an invitation, rather than an absence. That was his language. And now, she spoke it fluently. One evening, William admitted something to her. "I've been trying to buy his healing," he said quietly. "I thought if I paid enough, we'd get results." Grace didn't respond with judgment, only a gentle truth. Some things don't cost money. They cost time. And patience. That night, William sat on the floor beside Benjamin, just as Grace often did. He didn't talk. He didn't suggest they play. He simply sat. And after several minutes, Benjamin reached over, placing a block in William's hand. No words passed between them, but William felt something shift in his chest. It was then he understood what Grace meant by learning his language. It wasn't about decoding secret signals or reading hidden meanings. It was about slowing down enough to see the person in front of you, without trying to change them first. From that day on, William stopped timing Benjamin's progress. Instead, he began measuring something else entirely. The moments of connection. The giggles over a wobbly tower of blocks. The small hand resting on his arm during breakfast. The look of recognition when their eyes met across the room. Grace had not fixed Benjamin. She had simply created an environment where he could discover what was already inside him. The desire to move, to trust, to reach. And in doing so, she had quietly rewritten the way William saw his son, and himself. What doctors and therapists had failed to achieve wasn't a matter of skill or science. It was a matter of heart. And in that, Grace was a master. William Carter had been turning the moment over in his mind for hours, the way his son, Benjamin, had walked into his arms for the first time, the way Grace's calm voice had explained it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. But one question still lingered. Why? Why had she cared enough to make such a difference in his son's life, when so many professionals had given up or grown impatient? It was late in the evening, when he finally asked her. The rain had eased outside, the city lights glinting off the glass walls of the penthouse. Benjamin was asleep upstairs, and the house was quiet except for the faint hum of the dishwasher. Grace sat across from him, her posture relaxed, but her eyes steady. "I need to understand," William said. "Why did you care so much? You're not family, you're not obligated." For a long moment, Grace didn't answer. Then she looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. "Because I lost a child," she said softly. William's breath caught. "He wasn't biologically mine," she continued. "His name was Jordan. I was his live-in nanny. For 3 years. He had the same eyes as Benjamin, big, watchful, like he was trying to take in the world without letting it see too much of him. He was quiet, sensitive to sound, cautious about touch. He reminded me of your son from the moment I met him." She paused, as if sorting through memories too heavy to rush. Jordan's parents were successful people. Busy. Always chasing the next deal, the next event. They loved him, but they didn't have patience. They wanted results fast. So they hired every kind of therapist, bought every program, demanded constant updates. And when progress didn't come quickly enough, they changed the plan, over and over. Her voice grew quieter. "I kept telling them he needed time. That pushing him only made him retreat further. But they didn't want to hear it. To them, standing still meant failure. And one day, when I insisted they slow down, they fired me." William felt a chill work its way through him. "What happened to him?" he asked. Grace's jaw tightened, her gaze fixed on some far-off point. "A year later, I heard from one of the nurses I knew. Jordan had been hospitalized. His body had given out from a combination of stress and a rare, untreated condition they'd missed because they were too focused on his delays. He didn't make it." The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. William's chest ached. You weren't there? She shook her head. Number. And I've never forgiven myself for that. I wasn't there when he left. I couldn't tell him it was okay. I couldn't be the one person who believed in him until the end. Her eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. When I first saw Benjamin, standing in the corner of that big living room, so small, so silent, I saw Jordan, and I promised myself I wouldn't lose another child to impatience, not if I could help it. William sat back, feeling the weight of her story press into him. It wasn't just skill that had brought Benjamin to his feet. It was a vow born out of grief. Grace had carried that pain quietly, using it not to close herself off, but to open herself more deeply to another child who needed her. You've done more for him than anyone else, William said, his voice rough. I didn't heal him, Grace replied. I just gave him what Jordan never had. The space to find himself. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Outside, the rain tapped gently against the glass. Upstairs, Benjamin shifted in his sleep, a small sigh escaping him. William realized then that Grace's presence in their home wasn't an accident, it was a second chance. Not just for Benjamin, but for her. And maybe, in some way, for him too. In the soft stillness of that night, William made a silent promise of his own, that his son would never again be rushed into milestones or measured only by progress charts. That, like Grace, he would learn to see the child in front of him, not the expectations around him. Because some steps, the ones that truly matter, aren't taken with legs. They're taken with the heart. William Carter had always believed he was doing his best as a father. He provided for Benjamin, ensuring his son had the finest doctors, the most advanced therapy equipment, and a home filled with everything money could buy. But as he stood in the living room that night, watching Grace's calm presence coax Benjamin into walking for the first time, a truth he had avoided for years began to surface. He had been there physically but not present. The thought unsettled him. In the years since his wife's passing, William had buried himself in work, telling himself it was for Benjamin's future. Long hours at the office, business trips that bled into weekends, meetings that always seemed too important to miss, these became his shield against grief. He convinced himself that being in the same house was enough, that proximity equaled fatherhood. But seeing his son take those first wobbly steps into his arms felt like a light cutting through fog. Benjamin didn't just need a roof over his head or another specialist's appointment. He needed him. Not the CEO. Not the man with a schedule booked months in advance. Just his father. After Grace explained how trust and presence, not pressure, had helped Benjamin, her words stayed with him. He's still afraid. Not of walking, of being left alone. It was a truth William couldn't ignore. He thought back to the countless evenings he'd come home after Benjamin was asleep, the mornings he'd left before his son had woken. Even on rare weekends at home, his mind had been elsewhere, tethered to his phone and the constant stream of emails. He'd mistaken providing for parenting. That night, as Benjamin slept upstairs, William made a quiet decision. I'll stay home, he told Grace. It wasn't a statement made for her approval, it was a promise to himself. The next morning felt different. There was no rush to get dressed for the office, no urgent calls pulling him away before breakfast. Instead, William sat cross-legged on the rug, his crisp, white shirt sleeves rolled up, watching Benjamin build a tower of blocks. He didn't speak, didn't instruct, just watched fully, completely. When Benjamin reached for another block and toppled over, William instinctively moved to help. But he stopped himself. He waited. And to his surprise, Benjamin pushed himself back, up, smiling, and tried again. It was such a small act, but to William, it was monumental. It wasn't just physical progress, it was confidence. Grace stood quietly in the doorway, observing. You look surprised, she said with a faint smile. I am, William admitted. I used to think he was broken. He was never broken, she replied softly. Just waiting for someone to stop rushing. Her words struck deep. William realized he'd been rushing everything, Benjamin's healing, his own grief. Even the way he measured love in milestones, rather than moments. He had been so focused on fixing what he thought was wrong, that he'd overlooked what was right in front of him. From that day on, William began restructuring his life. Meetings were rescheduled, travel, plans canceled, and for the first time in years, the penthouse felt lived in during daylight hours. He learned the rhythm of Benjamin's days, when his son liked to play quietly, when he wanted to explore, and when he simply needed to curl up in someone's arms. There were no grand speeches or dramatic gestures, just consistent presence. And slowly, Benjamin began seeking him out, not just as a figure in the house, but as his father. One evening, as they sat on the floor surrounded by toy dinosaurs, Benjamin climbed into William's lap without hesitation. The boy's small head rested against his chest. And William wrapped his arms around him, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. In that quiet moment, William understood something he wished he had realized years earlier. Being a father wasn't about the big wins or perfect solutions. It was about showing up, day after day, even when it was messy, slow, or imperfect. He had missed so much already. But now, he wasn't going to miss another moment. The morning sunlight spilled across the penthouse floor, casting warm stripes over the thick rug where Benjamin sat surrounded by a scattering of colorful blocks. William Carter, still in his white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, leaned back against the couch and simply watched. There was no phone in his hand. No conference call on his mind. Just his son, in all his small, determined glory. Benjamin was trying to build a tower. His little hands trembled slightly as he balanced one block atop another, tongue peeking out in concentration. William had seen him do this before, but there was something different now, something in the boy's posture, in the way he approached the task. The difference was subtle but unmistakable. Before, Benjamin would hesitate, glancing toward the nearest adult for reassurance before making a move. If something fell or shifted, his body would go rigid, his eyes clouding with the old fear of failure. Sometimes he would retreat entirely, abandoning the game. But today, he was different. When the tower leaned and collapsed with a soft clack, William instinctively leaned forward, ready to comfort him. Yet Benjamin didn't cry. He didn't even look over for help. Instead, he reached for the fallen pieces, his small fingers working quickly to rebuild. There was no panic. In his eyes, only focus. William sat back slowly, a mixture of pride and awe filling his chest. This was progress. Not just the physical kind the therapists had always measured, but something deeper, emotional. Resilience. From the kitchen doorway, Grace stood watching, her hands drying on a towel. "You see it, don't you?" she asked quietly. William glanced up at her and nodded. "I do. He's not afraid anymore." Grace stepped into the room, her tone gentle. "That's because he knows you'll be here. Whether he stands, falls, or tries again." Her words settled over him like sunlight. William thought about all the years Benjamin had spent without that assurance, growing up in rooms where he was evaluated, timed, and tested, rather than simply seen. Every stumble had been treated as a setback, every delay as a problem to solve. Now, each stumble was simply part of the game. He remembered the way Benjamin had clung to him after those first steps the day before, the boy's small body trembling with both excitement and uncertainty. That night, William had promised himself that his son would never again feel alone in his efforts. He would be there, not to catch him before he fell, but to help him believe it was safe to get back up. Over the next hour, William watched Benjamin's persistence unfold. The boy tried stacking the blocks in different shapes, experimenting with balance, even using toy dinosaurs as guards for his creation. Each time the structure toppled, Benjamin's laugh grew freer, his movements more confident. The floor was littered with evidence of trial and error, but not once did he give up. It wasn't just in his play. Over the following days, the same pattern emerged in other parts of Benjamin's life. When they went for short walks around the living room, he began letting go of William's hand for a few steps at a time. If he wobbled, he didn't freeze, he adjusted, then kept moving. At mealtimes, he reached for his cup himself, instead of waiting for it to be handed to him. Even when he dropped it once, splashing juice on the table, he looked up at William with a sheepish grin, as though daring him to be upset. William didn't take the dare. Instead, he smiled back. "Try again, buddy." Grace often reminded him that this kind of progress wasn't built in grand leaps, but in small, steady choices, choices that became habits, habits that shaped belief. The more Benjamin experienced falling without fear, the more he understood that falling wasn't the end. One evening, after Benjamin had gone to bed, William found himself sitting in the quiet living room, thinking about how much had changed. It wasn't just his son who was learning. He, too, was discovering the value of patience. Not the passive kind that waits for things to happen, but the active kind that stays engaged through every step, every setback, every try. Grace joined him, settling into the armchair across from the couch. You're different too, she said with a knowing smile. William chuckled softly. I used to think progress was about milestones. Now I think it's about moments. Exactly, Grace said. And he's having more of them because you're here for all of them. That night, before going to bed, William peeked into Benjamin's room. His son was sprawled across the bed, one hand curled around a toy dinosaur, his face peaceful. William stood there. For a long moment, the quiet broken only by the boy's steady breathing. In that stillness, he understood that this was what true fatherhood looked like, not orchestrating every outcome, but creating the safety for a child to explore, to risk, and to grow. Benjamin was no longer afraid of falling. And William was no longer afraid of slowing down. To be there when he did. The evening had settled softly over the city, the last streaks of gold fading into the deep blue of night. William Carter sat on the couch with his son, Benjamin, nestled against his chest. The boy's small hand clutched a toy dinosaur, his breathing slow and even as sleep tugged at him. Across the room, Grace stood quietly, collecting a few stray blocks from the floor. William's gaze lingered on her. For weeks now, he had been replaying everything she had done for his son, how she had coaxed him into standing without commands, how she had taught him to trust without even trying to teach in the traditional sense. More than that, she had reminded William of what fatherhood was supposed to mean. When Benjamin shifted in his lap, William spoke. Grace, he began slowly, his voice low but steady, I want you to stay. She paused mid-motion, the block in her hand frozen. Stay, you mean, as his nanny? William shook his head. Number. As part of our lives. A small, almost amused smile touched her lips. That's not what I came here for. I know, William said quickly, not wanting her to mistake his offer for charity or convenience. I'm not asking because it's easier to keep you here than find someone else. I'm asking because you're the first person who saw him, not just what's wrong, or what's possible, but him. And maybe. His voice caught for a moment. Maybe you saw me too. Grace studied him for a long moment. If I stay, it can't just be as the one who watches him, while you disappear back into your work. I'm not here to make your life easier while you avoid the hard parts. William nodded without hesitation. Then tell me what it would take. Her eyes softened, but her tone remained firm. If I stay, I keep you accountable. Not just to Benjamin, but to the man you say you want to be. No excuses. No going back to the way things were. The weight of her words settled between them. It wasn't a light offer she was making, it was a commitment that would require him to change permanently, not just in moments of inspiration. He thought about the nights he had chosen work over bedtime stories, the mornings when his son had eaten breakfast alone, the years he had been more of a figure in the background than a father in the room. Deal, William said finally, his voice sure. Grace's eyes searched his face, looking for any trace of hesitation. Finding none, she gave a small nod. Then I'll stay. Benjamin stirred at the sound of her voice, blinking drowsily before reaching up and touching his father's face. William kissed the tiny hand and held it against his cheek. Grace sat down. Across from them, her expression unreadable, though there was a warmth there that hadn't been before. In that quiet moment, the air in the penthouse felt differentless, like a space filled with expensive furniture, and more like a home. William realized that what he was offering wasn't just a place for Grace to work. It was an invitation into something deeper, something neither of them had expected when she first arrived. The days that followed tested the promise they had made to each other. Grace kept her word. She didn't shy away from calling him out when he slipped into old habits. If she noticed him reaching for his phone, instead of engaging with Benjamin, she would simply hand him a toy or point toward the boy, a silent reminder of their deal. William, for his part, began reshaping his routines. Morning coffee became a time for reading picture books aloud. Evenings were no longer consumed by emails but by block towers, storytelling, and shared laughter. There were moments when it wasn't easy. Some days, fatigue and deadlines pressed against William's resolve, tempting him to retreat into work. But then he would look at Benjamin, at the boy's growing confidence, at the way he now ran to greet his father at the door instead of standing back, and he knew the choice he had to make. Grace fit into their lives seamlessly, not as an employee, but as an anchor. She knew when to step forward and guide, and when to step back and let father and son find their own rhythm. Her presence was both a comfort and a challenge, a reminder that this wasn't just about keeping a promise to her, it was about keeping a promise to himself. One Saturday morning, weeks after their agreement, William woke to the sound of giggles. coming from the living room. He found Benjamin balanced on one foot, wobbling but determined, while Grace clapped encouragement from the couch. The boy stumbled, caught himself, and then looked over his shoulder at his father, grinning as if to say, "Did you see that?" William smiled, crossing the room to join them. Grace gave him a nod, part approval, part reminder. And in that instant, he understood that her role in their lives wasn't just to help Benjamin grow stronger, but to ensure that he never forgot what mattered most. As the three of them sat together that morning, the city bustling somewhere far below, William felt something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of family. Not bound by blood alone, but by choice, commitment, and the willingness to show up every day. Grace hadn't just agreed to stay. She had agreed to stand beside him in the most important role he would ever have. And William knew deep down that he was never going to let either of them down again. The rain had long since stopped, and the penthouse was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside. William sat on the rug, Benjamin curled in his lap, his tiny fingers wrapped around his father's hand. Across from them, Grace smiled, not the polite smile of an employee, but the warm, unguarded smile of someone who belonged. In that moment, it didn't matter how they had come together or what titles they held. They were no longer a grieving father, a struggling child, and a determined caregiver. They were something far more, enduring, a chosen family. They had built it not through bloodlines, but through trust, presence, and a love that refused to be rushed. Every small victory, every shared laugh, every quiet moment had stitched them closer until the three of them could no longer imagine life apart. The walls that once held silence now carried the sounds of connection. And the boy who once feared to stand now stood, surrounded by people who would never let him face the world alone. Family is not always the one you are born into, it's the one you choose, and the one that chooses you back. Sometimes, love comes in unexpected forms, and healing begins the moment we show up for one another with no agenda, but to stay. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. What does family mean to you? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories that remind us of the power of kindness, trust, and love.